There was a question earlier this morning from someone who said, how do we deal with fake orders, right? So somebody places an order and it's cash on delivery. So you don't know whether it's a real order until you deliver it and you try to collect. And somebody, the customer then says, well, I never ordered that, right, after inspecting the goods. I immediately thought of a prank I played as a child, which I'm not going to say here because it's too embarrassing. But I also immediately thought about an incident where my son and I were in New Zealand and had a cup of coffee paid for by someone else, a friend of mine in New Zealand. So we went to Starbucks, had a coffee, and then I insisted on paying, he insisted on paying, and finally he said, look, I'm already have my phone out, I'm just gonna pay for it. He touched his phone on the cash register, the bill was paid, and we left the store. My son, who has lived in the Philippines all his life, then looked at me and said, did he just pay with his phone? I said, yeah. It debited his account with the phone, or maybe his account in the bank. And then he said, you mean the phone talked to the cash register? I said, no, first the cash register talked to the phone. Then the phone talked to the cash register. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, in the Philippines, the phones don't even talk to other phones. Never mind to the cash register, right? Imagine what it would be like if we dealt with less cash in our logistics systems, in our order fulfillment systems. Imagine what the future might be like if in the Philippines we learn to deal with less cash, because we're still almost entirely cash in the Philippines. So there's one provocative thought that I'm going to leave you with. I only have 5 slides, by the way, so this is going to be quick. You have to pay attention because you'll miss the secret solution to all your supply chain problems if you miss one slide. Consider the power company. Okay, people ask me all the time, what is your version, Tonet, what is your vision of the perfect supply chain? Right? And I always say, it's the power company. Think about it. You press that switch and the light will turn on. All right? Demand driven. You press that switch, that light turns on. Specific to the location, right? And how quickly does the product arrive? At the speed of light, literally, right? And then you think about, on Saturday, I have a party. I'm going to turn on more lights in my office. Should I call the power company and revise my projection or my demand estimate or my forecast for the month? No. I just turn on more switches and the lights come. So immediately interactive, unconstrained supply. And I've never heard, unless you use huge batteries in your house, you don't really keep inventory of electricity, right? It just arrives. You think about this, and I'll give you another example on my 4th slide. You think about this, and you think about how far we need to get in terms of getting to the perfect supply chain. Because that's not even the most perfect one. I just thought of one yesterday, and I saw it because I was listening to a professor talk about something, and it hit me that there was an even better supply chain than that. This is just a quick slide to show you what kind of supply chain I had to deal with. It was end-to-end. It was global. It was 17 plants. You can see all the numbers there. I have to add that there were 19 nationalities. 19 different nationalities reported into me. And I have my favorites and I have my less favorites, but of course I won't tell you that because I'll cause an international incident, right? But it was quite interesting. It was one of the richest jobs I've ever had. And my biggest regret, I just retired, as Richard mentioned, I just left this supply chain about 4 weeks ago. And I miss the people the most. It's the people that I miss. I just had dinner with one of my direct reports 2 nights ago, and we had a lot of stories. But okay, so you see all those red dots. Those are all the factories. And we saw a lot of charts today of supply chains, right? Christine just showed one, from supplier to customer. Well, this is the network I had to deal with. Every time I got a phone call at night, it really woke me up. I had to answer the phone. And fortunately, I had only a few phone calls that really woke me up at 3 in the morning. But when you are in infant nutrition, in a global supply chain, somewhere in the world, it's daytime. And somewhere in the world, there is a problem. And if they know that I live in Singapore, and they still go ahead and call me at 3 in the morning, my first question on the phone was, did the baby just die? Okay? Because that happens, right? It has never happened to us. It has happened to other companies. It has happened once where our product was suspected and then very quickly cleared by the US Food and Drug Association. So that was always my first question. Did the baby just die? And the answer was inevitably, no. Our spray dryer broke down in Mexico or whatever. What the hell are you waking me up for? My heart stopped, right? Now, if you look just below those 3 clusters of dots in the middle, those are European plants, right? Now just below that is this. What is this? This is Positano. It's a town in Italy. Hopefully, this is where I intend to retire. Okay? And forget all about dying babies and global supply chains, right? And this is what kept me going. It kept me going through that job. It was still the most enjoyable job I had, but I'm looking forward to this. Recently, my CEO, who also retired about 6 months ago, sent me a text message. He was in this town, Positano. It's on the Amalfi Coast. It's very easy. It's south of Naples, and from there you take a ferry to Capri, right? So it's really nice. He sent me a text message with a picture of a house and a price on it. He said, I just found you your retirement villa. It's 400,000 euro, right? It's 4 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. And my reaction was, that's not a bad price. So I texted him that's a good price. His answer was, I know that. I gave them your contact details, and I told them you were willing to pay more because you really liked it. I said, why did you do that? He said, well, that's what you did your whole career to me, right? You kept buying factories. The last factory I bought, and maybe I can't talk about this yet because I'm still under a non-disclosure agreement. The last one I bought exceeded his limit, right, by a significant amount. So he gave me a limit. Finally, he said, I'm sick and tired of listening to you. You think the whole world will collapse if you don't buy this one factory in Australia. Go ahead and go down there, negotiate the hell out of it. And I want it to be $150 million. That's the cap. So I went down there. It was Christmas. Kids were running around the hotel, buffet, Christmas carols, tripping over the Christmas tree, and I was negotiating with this other party over the plant, and I got it down to something significantly over 150, and I closed the deal, and I called up my CEO and told him that I had closed the deal for much higher than 150, and that's why he told the villa in Positano that I'm willing to pay more. I finally asked him actually a couple of years ago, how do you make decisions about acquisition? His name's Casper. So Casper, we were having a beer, ironically here at Greenbelt, right? We were not in Chicago or Singapore. We were having a beer, and I said, how do you make lease or buy decisions? This is good stuff, right? it's also 1930s stuff. So if you think this is brand new, but it was new to me, right? He said, have you heard of the Dupont Formula? And I said, no. Well, it's like this, he said. My job, his job, the mission of a CEO, right, Chief Executive Officer, is to drive shareholder value. That is the mission of any CEO, because his company is owned by shareholders, whether they are public or a single family, right? He must create wealth for the shareholders. That's the whole point of going into business. You do that by providing great product and great service, yes. But eventually, his mission, the thing that he would get fired for, is failing to drive shareholder value. And many people have said, okay, what drives shareholder value? Is it bigger sales? Is it a bigger profit margin? What is it? Is it better cash flow? And many analysts have looked at this for many years and have come to the conclusion that what drives shareholder value, you know what shareholder value is, right? The share price either goes up or the dividend on that share goes up. That's shareholder value. You're creating wealth for the owners of the company if the company itself becomes more valuable, right? What drives shareholder value is return on equity. Well, duh, that kind of makes sense. If I'm going to invest in the company, if it's a public company, I'd like to see return come back, right? What do you do when you start a company? Where do you get the money you need to start a company? Where do you get the money you need to start a company? Come on, guys. You borrow from the bank, people say immediately, right? You're all capitalists, you all want to borrow from the bank right away. No, your own savings, right? If your own savings aren't enough, what is the next source of money for you to put up a company? Somebody said your friend. Well, you must have really good friends, right? My answer is almost the same. My answer is your father-in-law's savings. You should always marry for money, right? This is the important thing. You have to remember this. And then if it's not enough, you get a partner, right? You get a partner. If it's not enough, then you borrow from the bank. That's why it's called liabilities plus shareholders' equity, right? That's what funds your balance sheet on the right side. So return on your father-in-law's savings or your friend's savings is very important. He wants to get something back, right? So what is the formula for return on equity? Well, guess what? It's very simple. It's your profit margin times your asset turnover plus your financial leverage. And each of those terms break down into what is profit margin? It's income over sales. It's very simple, right? It's income over sales. That's your profit margin. Your asset turnover is sales over assets. All right? How much money can you get out of the asset you bought? Noel talked about this. He talked about efficiency. He talked about consolidating assets and sharing them. Because why would you buy your own fleet of trucks if your neighboring company or your distribution center has exactly the same fleet, right? How much sales can you get out of your assets? And then you multiply that by financial leverage. I'll say very little about this because this is financial voodoo, right? This is black magic. But total assets is equal to liabilities plus equity, correct? Assets is equal to liabilities plus equity. So liabilities plus equity over equity is simply an indicator of, are you using your capital wisely, or are you using borrowings more than you're using your capital, which is good. Which is good. If you're leveraging your balance sheet, it's good. So I'll leave that as is, and I'll concentrate on the first two. Now, whose job is it to maintain profit margin? Whose job is that in the enterprise? Right, remember, we're talking global level now. Who's in charge of? It's the general manager of the country. Right? The general manager of the country is in charge of maintaining. That's his job. That's what he will get fired for. is maintaining margin. Whose job is it to provide asset turnover? The supply chain guy. The guy who keeps wanting to buy assets, right? He better create sales out of that assets. You don't buy a plant unless the plant pays for itself in terms of net sales. Remember, it's a multiplier. Look at the equation, guys. It's a multiplier. If it's less than 1, it dilutes ROE. It has to be greater than 1. That whole asset turnover term has to be greater than 1. For it to be greater than 1, your assets must be small. That's why you share. That's why you look for partners. You don't build your own warehouse. You look for where can you rent one so you don't have an asset. And you get more sales out of that because you're enhancing return on equity, right? But there's a catch. There's a catch. You're also in charge of net income as a supply chain person. Why? Because net income is the difference between sales and cost, right? If your cost is too high, if your rental of the asset is too high, then profit margin suffers too. And your general manager says, Tonet, why are our products so expensive? Well, it's not the product, sir. It's the truck that we had to pay Transportify for, or whoever, right? Which is why all these crowdsourcing ideas are great, because you're sharing the cost. At some point, does it become better to acquire your own asset? Of course. Work the formula. If the formula tells you that it's becoming a number below 1, you need to reduce that asset or increase your sales. This is how you manage a company. This is it. It's funny how at the executive level, at global level, people say, I've already described our strategy, now I'm going to call my finance director to explain the finances. Are you crazy? It's all about finance. It's all about this. This is how you manage a company. All right? That's a heavy slide, so I spent a little bit more time there. We're now going to drive through the next few slides. You can see, by the way, that look, the arithmetic works out, right? You cancel, 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 and what you get, net income over equity. What did I tell you? Return on equity, right? So the damn formula works. 1932, Dupont, right? Still very valid today. How many of you remember this logo? If you've been alive for 100 years, you probably remember this logo, right? Which company is this? Kodak. What killed Kodak? iPhone. Other answers? Digital camera. What else? Polaroid. Supply chain. Listen to that. The SanDisk memory card. Right? I thought that was the answer. The SanDisk memory card killed Kodak. Then I talked to somebody who actually managed Kodak at the global level. She was Indian. Her name was Nandina. I said, what killed Kodak? And she said, you'll get a very different answer from me. She said, what killed Kodak is what Antonio Perez, the last CEO they hired in Spain, told them, their own CEO told them that what's killing the company is complexity. Complexity killed Kodak. KKK. The Spanish don't spell very well, right? Think about it, guys. Think about it. What did you need to do to get a photograph of your grandmother? You had to buy film. Film, right? That spool thing. I know it's hard to remember, but the only film Kodak sells now is X-ray. X-ray film. And even then, it's turning to digital already. So then you bought film. Then you opened your camera and you put the spool in, Then you had to thread the damn film, and then you had to wind it, and then you had to close it very carefully so that the light would not get in. Remember this? Then you took pictures, and you took pictures, your grandmother, etc. And then when it was finished, what do? You open the camera and destroy all the pictures, right? You have to remember to rewind the film. Then you open, then what do you do? What do you do after? You take it to downtown, to the shop, right? To the Kodak lab, to fluoro blueprinting. Are they still around? Still around? Okay? And that's compare that to this, right? That's a Samsung S8 mobile phone camera. Never mind that. I'm not endorsing Samsung, right? Look at the other side. Look at your right side. I thought the power company was the best supply chain. This even better, because it's demand-driven, it's speed of flight, it's zero inventory, it's customer-specific. I want my grandmother to look younger. You can do it with the software on your phone. You can do it right there, and you can say, that's not so good. She looks really strange. We're going to put it back to where it was. It's interactive. I can delete it. I can print it. I can send it. I can send it by WhatsApp or overseas. We take pictures now for Christmas Noche Buena dinner, and within seconds we send it to my sister in San Francisco, and she's part of the dinner. You remember when you had to put them in, you couldn't put them in the Paravion airmail, right? Do not enclose pictures. Challenge you that this is the future of supply chain, not photographs. You can't take a picture of the grocery item and send it, right? But you have to think outside the box. If you had asked, remember my story about my son buying Starbucks coffee with a phone? If you had asked MasterCard 10 years ago who their biggest competitor was, they would have said American Express or Visa, right? Wrong. iPhone, Samsung. Who would have thought that a telephone would compete with your MasterCard? I have another story. We went to a hotel in Banaue, and my youngest son, who was born in 1991, pointed to the telephone on the desk and said, "What's that, Dad?" "That's a telephone." "Oh, I know that, but what is that round thing in the middle?" I said, "You know when you say dial a number? That's a dial." We said, "It's a noun." He said, "Yeah, you millennials turned it into a verb." Right? It's a dial. Right? Anyway, if you had asked people, they would never have thought 10 years ago. Here's the last point I will make, and then we're over. Sorry about that. What is the future? What is the future of logistics? What is the future of supply chain? Demand-driven, instantaneous delivery, no inventory. Who was I talking to earlier about the traffic? Everybody talks about the traffic, right? But I bet you, if I added up all of your daily sales in all of your companies right now, I would get to maybe $50 million, right? Your sales in one day. You know how much Alibaba sells in one day? Mead Johnson sold $4 billion a year. And one day my CEO, the same crazy guy, Casper, right? He told us that Alibaba sells $4 billion a day. And I said, "A day?" And he said, "Yeah, it's probably a very long day, Tonet." You know? But if you took your daily sales, and you add it all up, and you imagine that it's all caught in traffic, and you take the cost of goods of those sales or non-sales, right? Because they're in traffic, you haven't converted them to cash. They haven't been sold. They're stuck in traffic. Just your day's sales 1 day in traffic, imagine the cost. So maybe it's $20 million. Right? I don't know what your daily sales are, but mentally configure it. And think about how many signatures you need to buy a laptop in your company. Maybe 25 signatures. Right? And yet the traffic is tying up all your working capital in traffic, and you can't convert it to sales and to cash. And maybe you'll get it the following day because people will pay the following day, and you can't put it in the bank, and you've lost 1 day of inter-branch interest rates on all that cash, right? So you got to think about what is the future. Now, who invented the digital camera? Do you know? Who invented the digital camera? Kodak invented the digital camera. They did. They actually had a patent for it, except that they didn't register it for a long enough time. They invented it. You can imagine what was going on. This prototype digital camera was on somebody's desk. And then somebody else said, well, what about that? That could be the next innovation, right? And the answer was probably, oh, that's just a gimmick. I heard that this morning, that drone deliveries would be a gimmick, right? Maybe they are. But you know, I'm not so sure. Think about what it is that you have today in today's technology, sitting unused, apps, crowdsourcing, right? That could be your next digital camera, and if you don't pick it up, you're going to have a tombstone with your company's brand on it. All right. I hope that sets up the stage for some really good questions.